Last year exactly, 13 ships made it all the way through the Northwest Passage. 13. In an entire season. Meanwhile, Canada just committed over $40 billion to that same stretch of frozen water. New military bases, airfields, ports, radar systems. $40 billion aimed at a shipping route that almost nobody uses. On paper, that makes no sense at all, unless the ships were never really the point. Start with what's actually happening up there, because the real numbers are nothing like the hype. In the 2025 season, 13 vessels completed the full route through the Canadian Arctic. 9 went west, 7 went east, and a few did a round trip. Most were cargo ships and cruise ships, run by the same handful of operators who do this every year. The season was shorter than the year before, opening later and closing earlier. First ship in was in early August. Last one out was mid-October. That's the whole window. Zoom out further and it gets stranger. Since Roald Amundsen first pushed through in 1906, only about 465 vessels have ever completed the passage, total, in more than a century. Over half of those were private yachts. Cargo ships? Only around 63 have ever done it, and most of those happened in the last few years. This isn't a trade route, it's barely a trickle. The reasons are simple and they aren't going away fast. The ice is unpredictable. Wind and current shove it around constantly, so a channel that's clear one week can be blocked the next. There are choke points where the ice piles up and stays late. There's almost no deep water port along the way. The charts are poor compared to other major routes. There's no real search and rescue if something goes wrong, and if a ship gets into trouble out there, help is very far away. Insurance companies know all of this, so premiums are brutal. The American Defense Department figures the passage will be mostly ice-free in summer by around 2040. But mostly ice-free still means ice, and ice is what sinks ships. Now look at the other side of the Arctic, and the contrast is almost embarrassing. Russia's Northern Sea route running along the Siberian coast saw 103 transit voyages in 2025, up from 97 the year before. Around 3.2 million tons of cargo moved through it. Russia has deep water ports, up there a fleet of icebreakers to escort ships, and decades of government money behind it. Canada's route has almost none of that. Same melting Arctic, wildly different result. So Canada is pouring generational money into a passage that carries 13 ships a year, while the neighbor's route carries 100. That's the weird part. And the explanation has nothing to do with cargo. It's about who owns the water. Canada says the Northwest Passage is internal Canadian water, not a shortcut through Canada, but Canada itself the same as a lake. That means Ottawa gets to set the rules on shipping fishing pollution, everything. The United States flatly disagrees. Washington calls it an international strait open to any ship that wants through, and it has never once budged from that position. This has been simmering for over 50 years. People chased this route for centuries before that. Going back to the 1400s, spices from Asia were worth a fortune in Europe because they came overland through a chain of middlemen who each took a cut. The sea routes around Africa and South America were long and deadly. Whoever found a short northern path would get rich beyond reason, so country after country sent their best captains north, and country after country failed. It stayed a myth until 1903, when a Norwegian named Roald Amundsen set out with 5 men in a tiny boat. He hugged the coastline, got stuck in ice for years at a stretch, and learned survival skills from the Inuit he wintered with. 3 years later, he reached Alaska. He proved the passage existed. He also proved it was useless for business. And once the Suez and Panama Canals opened, the hunt lost its urgency. Then, in 1969, an American oil tanker called the SS Manhattan was reinforced and sent through the passage to see if oil from Alaska could be shipped east instead of piped. It made it barely after grinding through some of the harshest water on Earth. It tried again in winter and failed, and the oil companies gave up and built a pipeline instead. But the voyage lit a fire in Canada. Ottawa responded by passing a law regulating all shipping within 100 nautical miles of its Arctic coast, making it plain to the world that these were Canadian waters. Washington's answer was blunt. The Americans said they could not accept a Canadian claim that Arctic waters are internal, because accepting it would put at risk the freedom of navigation their Navy depends on worldwide. That statement is the whole dispute in one sentence, and it still stands today. Both sides have real arguments. Canada points to the law of the sea, which allows a country to draw straight lines around a tight cluster of islands and treat the water inside as its own. Look at the Canadian Arctic archipelago on a map, and it's not open ocean, it's a maze of channels between Canadian islands. Canada also points to the people. The Inuit have lived on and traveled across that ice for thousands of years. It's their hunting ground, their highway, and their food supply. Losing control of those waters would hit their way of life directly. The American side leans on a different rule, that straits used for international navigation stay open to all. And it's true that a lot of the world's key waterways work that way. The Turkish Straits cut right through Turkey and are international. The Danube runs through half of Europe and is international. The Americans ask why Canada should be different. But the deeper reason Washington won't fold has nothing to do with Canada at all. It's precedent. If Canada can lock up a channel because it runs between its own islands, other countries will grab that logic immediately. Iran could try it on the Strait of Hormuz. China could try it on the South China Sea. And there's a sharper problem right across the pole. Russia makes the exact same internal waters claim about its northern sea route. If Washington backs Canada, it hands Russia the argument too. Back in 1988, the two countries papered over it with a one-page deal. American icebreakers would ask permission before transiting Canada would grant it, and neither side would give up its legal position. They agreed to disagree. It held for decades, mostly because the Arctic was frozen solid, and nobody was going anywhere anyway. That arrangement is now under more strain than at any point since it was signed. And the reason is what's been happening on the other side of Baffin Bay. Since 2025, the American president has been openly pushing to take Greenland, the Danish Arctic territory, sitting just across the water from Nunavut. In January 2026, he said the United States would acquire it, arguing that otherwise Russia or China would end up controlling it. Asked whether he'd rather hold NATO together or get Greenland, he wouldn't answer straight and said it might be a choice. Thousands of Greenlanders marched through Nuuk in the largest protest that country has ever seen. Denmark committed billions in extra Arctic defense money. A dozen European countries sent military staff to the island in an operation openly meant to deter an American move. At Davos in late January, he backed off and ruled out using force. Then, this summer, he renewed the threats. And in August 2026, reports came out that a Texas oil company with ties to him had landed drilling equipment on Greenland's east coast with no local approval at all. Greenland's government put out a strong warning that no permission had been granted. Now, sit in Ottawa's chair. Your closest ally spent a year and a half trying to take an Arctic territory from another close ally. That same ally has never recognized your claim to the water running through your own islands. It has floated the idea of Canada as a 51st state. Suddenly, a 50-year-old legal disagreement stops feeling academic. That's when the $40 billion showed up. In March 2026, standing in a hangar in Yellowknife with troops behind him, Canada's Prime Minister announced the largest push into the north this country has ever attempted. More than $35 billion in federal money with about $10 billion in major projects on top. $32 billion of it goes into forward operating locations at Yellowknife in Nunavut and Iqaluit, plus the base at Goose Bay. 3 new military bases in the territories. Runways that can handle fighter jets, fuel storage hangars, ports, and something called the Arctic Economic and Security Corridor to tie the whole region together. And one line from that speech carried further than the money did. Canada, he said, would stop depending on any one nation. Nobody had to ask which one. For a country that ignored its own north for a century, that's a total reversal. Canada holds a massive share of the Arctic and has historically put in a fraction of what other Arctic countries spend. Roughly 300 full-time military personnel are stationed across the entire north, alongside about 1,800 Canadian Rangers. 40% of the buildings up there are over 50 years old. For years, the honest assessment from defense analysts was that Canada didn't have the equipment, the training, the forward bases, or the supply depots to defend its own Arctic. That's the answer to the weird math. The money isn't chasing 13 ships. It's buying the ability to back up a claim Canada has been making on paper since 1970 and has never been able to enforce. A sovereignty claim you can't police is just a sentence in a document. Bases ships radar and people turn it into something real. There's another dispute waiting in line too. Canada and the United States still don't agree on where the maritime boundary sits in the Beaufort Sea, and oil companies care about that answer. That same unsettled line muddies who's responsible for search and rescue out there. And right now, both countries are short on the gear to do it properly. And there is money in the passage eventually if it ever opens properly. Some estimates put it at billions a year in revenue for the region, if traffic ever approaches what the Panama Canal handles. Cruise ships already come, and passengers have paid tens of thousands of dollars a head for the trip. A cargo ship that went through in 2013 cut nearly 2,000 kilometers off its route, carried thousands of tons more, and saved a pile of fuel money. That's the long-term prize, and it's real, but it's decades away, and everybody serious knows it. The people with the most riding on this aren't in Ottawa or Washington. About 140,000 people live across Canada's north, and a large share are Indigenous. For them, the ice isn't a shipping lane. It's the ground they travel and hunt on, and it's getting less predictable every year. More ships mean more risk of spills in water that feeds communities. Inuit leaders have been clear that the ships aren't going to stop coming. So Inuit organizations need to be at the table when the rules get written. Ottawa says this time the money stays in the north with northern contractors and infrastructure that serves communities and not just the military. That promise was made before back in the Cold War, and it didn't hold. So the strange thing turns out to make perfect sense. Canada isn't spending $40 billion because 13 ships sailed through last summer. It's spending it because the ice is going, because Russia is dug in on the other side, because China keeps calling itself an Arctic country, and because Greenland just showed everybody exactly what happens when a superpower decides it wants a piece of the North. The traffic will come later. The argument over who owns the water is happening right now.